Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today I will analyze the case of Xaviar Babudar, who is also known as the Chiefsaholic. He's the topic of a documentary titled Chiefsaholic, A Wolf in Chief's Clothing. First, I'll look at the background of this case, move to the timeline of the crime, then offer my analysis. Xaviar Michael Babudar was born on July 3, 1994, in Kansas City, Missouri. His first name is misspelled. The second to last letter is an A instead of an E. According to his attorney, Xaviar pronounces his name like Xaviar, like caviar. I will pronounce it Xaviar. According to Xaviar, his father left his mother when he was 10 years old. After this, he, his mother, and his brother financially struggled and eventually lost their home. It appeared as though the three of them lived in a motor vehicle. In 2013, Xaviar became a superfan for the Kansas City Chiefs football team. He would dress up as a wolf in Chiefs clothing and attend their football games. All the games he attended, he did so by driving, even the away games. In 2018, Xaviar started an Instagram account. The next year, he expanded his presence to Twitter, where he eventually gained 40,000 followers. Not surprisingly, many of his posts involved the Kansas City Chiefs. Xaviar accumulated a criminal history involving misdemeanors, and he frequently gambled. He often made large bets on long shots. His true nature was hidden from his fans. Xaviar never mentioned being homeless or living a nomadic lifestyle. Rather, he portrayed himself as very successful. He falsely claimed that he had graduated from Kansas State University and that he managed multiple warehouses throughout the Midwest. Xaviar may have associated himself with caviar, but he was more like off-brand canned tuna. Now moving to the timeline of the crime. In 2022, Xaviar started conducting bank robberies. His typical pattern was to enter a bank wearing a mask, brandish a fake firearm, and demand money. He would often escape by riding a bicycle to a nearby location where he had parked his 2019 Mazda 3. Xaviar's first bank robbery was on March 2, 2022, when he took $70,000 from a bank in Clive, Iowa. During this robbery, he dropped a black glove in a wooded area not far from the bank. The glove contained $1,400 and his DNA. On April 28, Xaviar struck in Omaha, Nebraska, where he took $170,000 from a bank. He was back at it on July 13, stealing $303,000 from a credit union in West Des Moines, Iowa. In Nashville, Tennessee, on November 17, Xaviar robbed a credit union for $125,000. A hat was recovered from this robbery, which contained DNA matching the DNA from the glove found after the Clive, Iowa robbery. The police knew they were dealing with a serial bank robber. 12 days later, on November 29, Xaviar walked into a credit union in Savage, Minnesota, and demanded the employees open the vault. After he realized the vault only contained small bills, he fled from the building empty-handed. Later that day, he did the same thing at a credit union in Apple Valley, Minnesota. He was not interested in small bills. After these two attempted robberies, Xaviar completed a robbery on the next day, November 30. This time he returned to the same building he had robbed in Clive, Iowa, which was now a different bank. Clive escaped with $25,000 after jumping over the counter with a fake gun and ordering the bank employees to open the vault. About 2 weeks later, on December 15, Xaviar attempted to rob a bank in Papillion, Nebraska, but the doors in the vestibule were locked. He gave up and left the bank. The next day, December 16, 2022, Xaviar visited a credit union in Bixby, Oklahoma. Using a fake gun, he forced employees to hand over $139,000. Xaviar made his way into a nearby wooded area, changed his clothing, and used a bicycle to continue his escape. He was spotted by the police and fled. After a brief chase, Xaviar was arrested. Investigators found his Mazda parked nearby. In the vehicle, there were several pairs of goggles and gloves, which had been worn during other bank robberies. Xaviar was charged with bank theft. He had not yet been connected to the other bank robberies, just the one that he conducted in Bixby, Oklahoma. His bond was set at $250,000, but later reduced to $80,000. In February 2023, he was bailed out by a bail bondsman named Michael and stayed in a local motel. Xaviar had an ankle monitor and stayed in regular contact with Michael. Something that Xaviar did several months earlier became important at this point in the story. In June 2022, he placed two $5,000 bets at the Argosy Casino in Alton, Illinois. The first bet was that the Kansas City Chiefs quarterback Patrick Mahomes would win Most Valuable Player. The second bet was that the Chiefs would win Super Bowl 57. As it turns out, the Chiefs quarterback was named the Most Valuable Player, and on February 12, 2023, the Chiefs defeated the Philadelphia Eagles in Super Bowl 57. Xaviar won both bets, which meant he was owed $100,000 in winnings. On March 3, 2023, Argosy Casino sent Xaviar a check for $100,000. A few weeks later, Xaviar cut off his ankle monitor and went on the run. He made his way to Henderson, Nevada, where he purchased a vehicle. On June 8, 2023, Xaviar robbed a bank in Sparks, Nevada for $1,100. Less than a month later, on July 3, he robbed a bank in El Dorado Hills, California, getting away with $950. On July 7, 2023, the FBI arrested Xaviar in Sacramento, California. He was charged with 11 counts of concealment, money laundering, 4 counts of interstate transportation of stolen property, and 4 counts of bank theft. The government alleged that Xaviar laundered the money he took from banks and credit unions through casinos and online gambling. On February 28, 2024, Xaviar Babudar pleaded guilty to bank robbery, money laundering, and transporting stolen property across state lines. On September 5, 2024, he was sentenced to a term of 17 and a half years in prison and 3 years of supervised release. He cannot be released early from prison. He must serve every bit of the 17 and a half years. Now moving to my analysis. Here are my thoughts on a few areas that stood out to me in this case. Item number 1. There is no question that Xaviar was guilty of robbing multiple banks. Not only did he plead guilty, he was incriminated by data from his cell phone and from his DNA. The prosecution suggested that Xaviar perpetrated the crimes because he was addicted to fame. His attorney had a different opinion, saying that Xaviar was addicted to gambling. In looking at Xaviar's history, I think it's more likely that his defense attorney was correct. During his crime spree, Xaviar frequently visited casinos and used the stolen money to purchase chips. This, of course, could be considered money laundering, and perhaps that was part of Xaviar's reasoning, but I believe the primary purpose was to feed his gambling addiction. He took the money in order to gamble. Xaviar really didn't have much of a reason to launder the money. It's not like he was planning to buy a house or to make another heavily regulated type of purchase. Furthermore, if somebody was going to launder money from bank robberies, using casinos would not represent a great choice. They have cameras everywhere and carefully keep track of transactions. As far as the fame motive, I don't believe that Xaviar cared that much about being famous. When he was arrested, nobody knew that he was the Chiefsaholic. Many people had met him at games, but they didn't know his name. He was always wearing the costume, which included a wolf mask covering his face. Eventually, people figured it out because the guy in the wolf outfit missed a Chiefs game, but up until that point, Xaviar was not famous or notorious. Item number 2, when Xaviar won the $100,000 right after being released on bond, he talked about how this money would be life-changing for his mother and his brother. He emphasized his connection to his family, like this was the most important thing in his life. Clearly, there was a lot of room for improvement. His mother and brother lived in a motor vehicle, which was disgusting on the inside. $100,000 could have been life-changing. Instead of using the money to help them, Xaviar bought a vehicle and robbed 2 banks. His behavior is consistent with somebody suffering from a gambling addiction. Many people in this position claim they are just looking for one big payout, which can help the people they love. In reality, whether they win big or not, a person who is addicted to gambling will continue to gamble as long as they can. Any interest they have in helping people is superseded by their self-centeredness. Item number 3, in the documentary, an argument was made on Xaviar's behalf, essentially asserting that he was careful not to harm anyone during the robberies. Therefore, a severe punishment was not warranted. Many intense fans of the Kansas City Chiefs rallied behind Xaviar using this argument. It is true that Xaviar did not use a real firearm during the robberies, but he still put people in fear for their lives. This led to people being traumatized. One bank teller sued Xaviar for emotional distress and was awarded a $10.8 million judgment. She said the robbery changed everything for her. She definitely would not live her life the same after that. It is unlikely the bank teller will ever collect even a penny from Xaviar, but the judgment will make it difficult for Xaviar to profit from his crimes after he is released from prison. When considering all the evidence in this case, I believe that a 17.5-year sentence for Xaviar was fair. Item number 4. In the documentary, it seemed pretty clear that Xaviar was not a successful or productive individual even before his crime spree. This is someone who operated at a basic level with little motivation. With this in mind, how is it possible that he knew so much about gambling? How was he so active in this domain? He almost appeared to be diligent at times. Xaviar was placing all types of bets in many different places. This must have been a lot of work. Clearly, he was paying attention and learned a great deal about sports betting and other forms of gambling. When people have an addiction, like to gambling, they become extremely committed to it. All their abilities and all their other resources are deployed in service of the addiction. They can become extremely efficient and knowledgeable in certain areas related to the addiction, even though the rest of their life is a disaster. Perhaps that is what happened with Xaviar. There was something about gambling that appealed to him strongly, therefore he gave it his best effort. He paid attention and worked hard to understand everything the world of gambling had to offer. If Xaviar would have directed his abilities in a pro-social manner, he could have been quite successful. Item number 5. What are my thoughts on the documentary Chiefsaholic, A Wolf in Chiefs Clothing? First, I'll look at the positive aspects, then talk about the negative. On the good side, the documentary covered many angles related to Xaviar's stardom and robbery adventures. It explored the fan culture surrounding the Kansas City Chiefs, including interviews with several people who interacted with Xaviar. The documentary followed Xaviar's bail bondsman Michael around in Oklahoma, including Michael's interactions with Xaviar's mother after Xaviar skipped bail. The teller who sued Xaviar was interviewed. She talked about how terrifying the robbery was, and Xaviar's attorney discussed the purported weaknesses of the government's case against his client. The documentary was gritty and captured several unflattering moments with the key players in the story. For example, just about everything Xaviar said was embarrassing. Michael, the bail bondsman, trusted Xaviar when he should not have, and he lost his temper after having to write a check to the court when Xaviar skipped bail. Xaviar's attorney made cringeworthy football references when talking to the media after Xaviar pleaded guilty, and Xaviar's mother looked disheveled as she was living out of her vehicle. Ultimately, this theme developed where nobody in the story was particularly likable. A viewer may walk away disgusted with and feeling sorry for everyone in the film. This is a daring position for a documentary. Often, filmmakers tend to play nice and paint at least certain people in a good light. They often make it like good guys versus bad guys. In this case, there didn't really seem to be many good guys. Moving to the negative aspects, the documentary never actually told the complete story. It skipped around a lot, and with a runtime of 2 hours, was far longer than necessary. What Xaviar did was pretty straightforward. He robbed several banks and credit unions, was arrested, was released on bond, skipped bail, committed 2 more robberies, then went to prison. It was not a difficult story to tell, but the film did not clearly portray the timeline. At one point, when talking about how Xaviar skipped bail in 2023, a caption on the screen read 2024. At another point, a caption displayed the month and the day without including the year, but the story had just backed up a year. These aren't necessarily massive mistakes, but they just added to an already confused retelling of the story. I was left with a sense that the film was disorganized and really didn't have a point. It just kind of meandered throughout these various experiences connected to Xaviar's life without revealing anything profound and meaningful. To take a page from the style of Xavier's attorney, the documentary fumbled in the red zone, was called for a penalty, and missed the field goal. Those are my thoughts on the story of Xaviar Babudar. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you soon.